A warm welcome to all of you here. I welcome you all to Bangalore Business Literature Festival 2022. This is the 8th edition of the fest, and it is with great joy that I'm here today, this afternoon, a lovely afternoon in Bangalore where I'm sitting, to welcome you all on day one of the fest. I'll take a minute to explain what the fest is about and its personality and its character and how it and its genesis. Bangalore Business Literature Fest was founded in 2015 because we saw an opening, an opportunity for focusing on reading, writing, and publishing that was dedicated to business books in India. There are many literature fests, and there were literature fests even back then. But as it happens, business books don't get much of play. They don't get much of highlight in those fests because a lot of genres, a lot of other kinds of books are discussed. So the founders of the fest felt that it's great to have this kind of a forum, a platform, where the intent is to nurture and celebrate and foster the spirit of publishing, writing, and reading business books. And that is how BBLF, as we call it, was founded in 2015. So from those humble beginnings, we've come a long way. Like I said, this is the 8th year running, and that makes us the largest and the longest running business festival in India, business literature festival in India. Over the years, we must have hosted more than 200 speakers of varied stripes, all of them leading thinkers, authors, startup founders, corporate honchos. So people from extremely interesting and varied backgrounds, they've graced the occasion over these last 8 years. Along with them, thousands of readers, thousands of people like you have attended the fest. So I think we've created over 8 years an ecosystem, a rich ecosystem of speakers, readers, partners, and I must thank our partners also, our sponsors. So they've stood by us. So that is the kind of ecosystem that we've enriched, that we've nurtured over these years. One of the heartening things for us, and one of the hallmarks, is that Bangalore Business Literature Fest is all about deep, engaging, and transformative conversations. So we have a relaxed setting, and we take a topic which is based on the theme of a book. And in the last few years especially, we've been taking on the model of fireside chats. So fireside chats are in a Q&A model, or in the model of a conversation, where we have 2 or 3 people sitting around a table and talking. So there are questions and there are answers, and these are very stimulating. And most of our sessions are usually between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. So that's perfect for you, perfect for us. In recent years, the fest has grown along certain specific dimensions, a key one being that we've had speakers and audiences from abroad. And that's because we took the fest online. A heartening thing for me personally and for the entire team here is that we've kept the fest running even through the pandemic years. The last 2 years were extremely bad for all of us, but with the support of everyone in the BBLF ecosystem, we managed to pull it off. And we had extremely good sessions last year and the year before that. This is a year where I think there is a bit of, the mood is a little sober. And as I speak to you, some of my thoughts go back to the people who've been affected by the pandemic. This is the first for BBLF and generally for the world around. It's just now that we're emerging from the shadows of that blight, of that pandemic. And therefore, we in the team have come here with, there is hope, resilience, and relief riding high. And I think this year too, we've got a wonderful lineup of speakers, and I will explain a little later what we have lined up for you day after day. I'll explain the program details in a bit. So for now, what I'm going to do is invite the fest chair, V. Raghunathan, to inaugurate this year's edition of BBLF. But before he comes on screen, I want to give you a quick intro, a glimpse into the man. We call Raghunathan Raghu. So Raghu is an academic, a corporate executive, an author, a columnist, a hobbyist. He taught at IMA for 2 decades until 2001, after which he was the president of ING Vysya Bank for 4 years. From 2005 January to 2018 October, he was the CEO of GMR Vairalakshmi Foundation, which he steered towards many prestigious awards. From October 2015 to September 2020, He was the director of the India campus of School of Business, and he is now an adjunct professor in the same business school. Raghu is a prolific writer. Prolific is not the word. It's if there is a word beyond prolific, he is that. So he's authored nearly 600 academic papers and multiple books and many articles as a columnist. In fact, he's got 15 books. He's published cases in different fields, in different publications on capital markets, behavioral economics, corporate finance, and whatnot. Amongst his many books, his latest is titled Irrationally Rational. The 10 Nobel laureates script the story of behavioral economics. So Raghu, I welcome you on screen and request you to please inaugurate this year's fest.
Well, thank you, Ganesh. You have outlined the Bangalore Business Lit Fest's activities fairly well in summary. And thank you for that introduction. Let me welcome all the participants to the Bangalore Business Lit Fest or Bangalore Business Literature Festival, but we call it BBLF in brief. You know, the early lit fests in general used to be a meeting point between writers and readers of books. They would leisurely exchange ideas with each other, so the book readers would know what to look forward to from the writers. Writers would get ideas from the books, and thus the book industry would go on. But over a period of time, literature festivals have gradually grown into a celebration of books, book readers, book writers, ideas, thoughts, book publishers, libraries, and even general public, so that they can be brought closer to the world of books. But of course, in my view, the foundation of all books and book fests depends on or is based on book readers, without whom the book industry would come to a grinding halt. You know, Ganesh already mentioned that a lot of changes have been happening in the world of lit fests, especially following COVID. In fact, a whole lot of them, including us, have had to go online. So much so that even the oldest lit fest that we know of today, which is the Times and the Sunday Times Cheltenham Literature Festival in UK, perhaps the oldest literature festival, which started in 1949, went online in 2020. And so did our Jaipur Literature Festival. Even this year in January, it was turned into a hybrid festival. So January 28 to February 1, it was physical, while it was broadcast online from January 28 all the way to February 6. Of course, not all literature festivals are about books alone. You know, many of them are fairly laissez-faire and even go on to cover movies, food, relationships, finance, and so forth. And every large city today in India and elsewhere in the world for that matter, and today even smaller ones in India have their own literature festival. In fact, only yesterday I returned from the Ooty Literature Festival, which was a very boutique little lit fest over there, which was well attended by both in terms of speakers as well as audience. But of course, you know, given population of 140 crore or 1400 million, it's only to be expected that there will be, in absolute terms, a large number of readers, and therefore the future of Litfest seems to be fairly robust. And in fact, many of them, compete cheek by jowl in various large cities. For example, in Calcutta alone or Kolkata, there are two back-to-back literature festivals in winter. The EPJ Kolkata Library Festival and Literary Festival in December is immediately followed by Kolkata Literary Meet in January. Similarly, in Mumbai, the Mumbai International Literary Festival, or the Tata Literature Live as they call it, and the Times Literary Carnival happen in December, closely followed by Kala Ghoda Arts Festival. But of course, Kala Ghoda Arts Festival is not just a literary festival, it is much beyond, and it comes in January, immediately following the other two in December. Most lit fests tend to be fairly liberal, but the larger literary festivals are typically weighted in favor of literary and popular fiction most of the time, and with celebrities. Uh, Few literary festivals concentrate on non-fiction, exceptions apart, of course. But of course, they have to depend on fiction and they have to depend on celebrities because that's the only way to attract larger participation. But non-fiction world, whether of readers or of writers, has usually been less represented in most such literary festivals. While most of them are general literature festivals, there are many dedicated ones coming up these days. You have the Green Lit Fests, you have the Business Lit Fest that we have started, for instance. There is Bookaroo, which is Children's Book Fest, Sustainability Fests, which our Benedict himself runs, comic book lit fests, and graphic novel fests, and so on, to name a few specialized areas of festivals in this genre. And it is in this context, I'm very happy to say, which Ganesh also mentioned earlier, that we were probably the first to add the genre of business books to this range, especially in India, when we started Bangalore Business Literature Festival 8 years ago. However, since then, a couple of newer ones have entered this category, including the India Business Literature Festival of the Business World, which started only in 2018. Now, we at Bangalore Business Literature Festival have chosen to celebrate non-fictional literature, essentially business literature, with everyday folks who have a skin in the game of business literature, young or old, who are potential material for future celebrities or book lovers. Typically, BBLF picks a theme every year. And the theme this year is startups. We introduce a lot of startup literature, the new books that have been coming up, startup success, failure, and resilience stories, startup funding challenges, startups and technology, potential frauds, including in startups and business in general, social responsibility and social purpose of startup businesses, decoding behavioral economics for businesses, what makes startup entrepreneurs tick, the environment of student startups, and much more. So as you can see, the running theme underlying the entire fest is that of startups. And of course, we have our Best Business Book Award, which is the C.K. Prahalad Best Business Book Award, which is the 4th year of the award, if I'm not mistaken. This fest, BBLF, is anchored by a strong team. The motor of the festival, the real man behind everything that happens in the festival, is Benedict Paramanand, who is the CEO of the festival and a co-founder. Shankar Parameshwaran is another of the co-founders from Knowledge at Wharton, who is our other pillar. And I'm the third one, a co-founder too. We have an extended team comprising Ganesh Vancheeswaran and Ganesh Kirti, then Kashyap Kompela, Devabrati Ghosh, and Nayana Natarajan. In short, we have been growing in the course of time, 8 years. We have plenty to show for it. And we hope and expect to grow from strength to strength. And we are hoping that from next year, we would be able to go completely offline and have physical events. This year, only the first 4 days are completely online, except the last day, which is at Bangalore International Center, which is a physical event. With that, I'll wrap up and welcome you all to the Bangalore Business Literature Festival and declare the festival open. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Raghu. Thank you so much. If I may just add, and I want to ask you a couple of questions about this. You rightly mentioned that it's very important for us to meet offline. right? And hopefully next year it'll be a completely offline affair. Uh, I believe a lot of what happens here, and one of the stimulating aspects of our fest or any other good fest for that matter, are the conversations, right? Because ultimately you do have books, but books have a backstory. A lot is compressed within a book. And books, honestly, all the books at least, may not be accessible to everyone out there, to all of us. So I think one of the things we do in this fest is bring the best of minds, authors, people, like you rightly said, people who have skin in the game, whether that's startups or matured organizations, put them on the stage. I think it's a crucible of brilliant minds who then have brilliant conversations.
Absolutely. Ganesh, you have said it yourself. The only reason, of course, being online has its plus sides. We are able to get people, as you said, we are getting people internationally, which will not be
Right.
very easy, or it will make the any festival 10 times more expensive if they were all to be paid for their
That's
travel
right.
and being put up and so on. So there is a
Right.
lot going for the festivals, keeping part of it offline. But there
Right.
is that bonding that a reader
Yes.
wants to see with authors, especially in some
Yes.
cases. I'm not saying it's necessary in all cases, but
Right.
some human contact is also desirable. So it is in that sense that I was hoping that we'll be able to
Yes.
have a better balance of online
Of
and
course.
offline. Probably that is the future. For all we know, pure physical events, except those festivals which are where finance is not a problem, because in most cases literature festivals can range, the budgets can range from a few lakhs to a few crore. A
Yes.
Jaipur
Yes.
Literature Festival is a very different order altogether. We are
True.
all more niche, more small,
More
more
boutique.
focused little fests. And I
Right.
think, excepting for those where money is not an issue or they're backed by large corporates, as Jaipur Literature Festival is, for instance, I think for people like us, it's a blessing in disguise that now that out of compulsion we went on online, we will be able to do it in a hybrid mode, probably going further. But maybe at
Correct.
least 50% will be offline and 50% will be online.
Right, right, right. We'll be able to have the best of both worlds, the
Best of
online
both the
and the
worlds.
offline.
Right.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes,
Yeah.
you're right. So this year we do have the last day alone, which is offline. We have
Right.
5 hours dedicated to that, right? Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
My other question to you, Raghu, is you've been with us from the beginning, from the time this fest was nothing but a seed of thought. So from then to now, it's inevitable. We, like any other entity, we've also grown, we've evolved, not only grown, but we've also evolved, we've matured in different senses. So, your quick take, please, from day one of the fest to where we sit today. How would you encapsulate these 8 years for the fest?
You see, I have no doubt that we have made plenty of mistakes during our journey, but we have learned from those mistakes and we have built upon the learnings from those mistakes. And people like Benedict, Paramanand, and Shankar et al. Have, and with their team like you, have been putting in their best to make it a competent and yet a small lit fest. We have not
Right.
really, okay, one may turn around and say maybe we didn't get a very big turnout. But I think we were not even looking for very big turnout, because
That's right.
business
That's right.
literature by definition is more niche. We wanted
Yes.
it to be more intimate, a little deeper, with the people, like-minded people coming for business literature. There's a whole
Right.
lot of youngsters out there in colleges and business schools and what have you, who want to understand what non-fiction literature, especially business literature, is all about. So I think we are beginning to serve that purpose. And I have no
Right.
doubt that we have a long way to go. But already today, if you just go on a website and type business literature festivals,
Hmm.
you find only BBLF
That's
mainly.
right. Yes.
The
Yes.
only other one is the Business Worlds, which I mentioned, the
Correct. Correct.
India Business Lit Fest.
Right.
But we come right up there, and I'm sure we will, Benedict keeps on putting a lot of time on it, especially, from somewhere from June onwards. He's fully focused on this till the event is over.
True.
So I'm very optimistic, and I do believe that we are on to a good highway.
And we will keep pushing it one notch or a few notches
Absolutely.
year after year.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Uh,
Ganesh.
it's been lovely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Uh, yeah, sure. I think the speakers for the first session have arrived. So I will take the next 2 or 3 minutes in giving you, the audience, a quick glimpse of what you can expect over the next 5 days. So it's like this. Somewhere in my, welcome spiel, I think I did mention that it's all started with one day in 2015, and it indeed was just one day for till I think 2019. Subsequently, what we've done is spread the whole thing over a few days, so that one day has become 5 days this year, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. On today, tomorrow, the day after, and on Friday. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. We have 3 or 4 sessions on each of these days. Interesting, deep, engaging conversations. Our focus has never been on the number of conversations or the number of sessions that we've had. We've always had a limited number, but in each of them, we make sure that we ask the most important questions, get extremely important answers, and therefore the conversation is transformative in nature for people who watch. So this year too, it's going to be something like that, and I'm extremely excited about the lineup we have. So these 4 days, we're going to have sessions from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And on Saturday, we will have a hybrid. Say all these 4 days are going to be purely online. And on the 5th day, that is Saturday, the 17th of September, it's going to be hybrid. We're going to be meeting offline at Bangalore International Center, which is in Bangalore in Bangalore. So any of you watching from Bangalore and who've not registered separately, you have to register separately for that last day. Please do so. Please do so immediately, because that's, again, a power-packed event. And like Raghu and I were talking earlier, there's nothing that can beat the charm of meeting people physically, offline. The look, feel, the vibe is completely different. So please do register for that. And on that day, it's going to be from 10:30 to 4 p.m. All right. So before I introduce our first panelist and hand it over to him, I'd like all of us to just, spend 1 minute or 1 minute in silence. I think for two reasons. One is in memory of those whose lives have been blighted by the pandemic. Lives and livelihoods have been torn apart, lost, for many of them possibly irredeemably. And in equal part, I think we should also say gratitude. Express gratitude to the people who worked, toiled tirelessly during those 2 years, 2.5, 3 years, to pull us, collectively out of that deep shadow. So can I just request 30 seconds of silence as, we just go deep into ourselves in memory of these people and in gratitude. All right. On that note, I'm all excited to welcome the person who's going to anchor the first session of BBLF 2022. The session is titled New Age Literature, and I think there's none better than Ranjeet Pratap Singh to anchor this conversation with Ankur Warikoo. So many of you may not have, I'm honest here, many of you, in knowing the kind of person Ranjeet is, may not have heard of him or met him, but you must have heard of the company he runs, Pratilipi. So Pratilipi is India's largest storytelling platform, and across categories, across genres like literature, comics, short stories, audio stories, podcasts, stuff like that. In the last couple of years, they've even diversified a lot, and they've added a number of writers and readers to their platform. Today, it has about 5 million stories and over 30 million active monthly users in 12 languages. So that's Pratilipi for you. So Ranjeet, welcome, and welcome for the second time, I must say, because you graced the stage in 2019 also. So thank you so much for coming, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to hand over the screen and the mic to you as you navigate your conversation with another rock star, Ankur. Hi, Ankur, and welcome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ganesh.
Ganesh.
Hi, Ankur. Great to be here.
Good
So
to
for me,
meet you, Ranjeet.
of course, I assume that most of you, unlike me, would know Ankur already. But for people who don't, Ankur has been a operator, a founder, a writer, a content creator, and running his own businesses in different ways across different kinds of content, including motivating people, but also teaching them about functional things of how they can live their lives in a more conscious manner versus just going with the flow. And we will talk a little bit more about it during the course of session. So once again, welcome, Ankur.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege. I did not ever expect to be on any literature fest by far. So, congratulations to all of you for doing a poor job in selecting me, but I am thrilled to be here.
So Ranjit, if I might just give a rebuttal before I vanish from screen. So, boss, Ankur, I don't think you need a literature fest once in a year. You have a literature fest on LinkedIn and other places every day of the year, boss. Yeah.
And that was as far as I could have gone, Ganesh. But thank you for having me. That's very kind of you.
All
Is there,
right.
I
Thank
think,
you. The pleasure is ours. And just one note for the audience before I go and hand over this to Ranjit. You will have questions, and you should. So please write in the comment box that you see to the somewhere on your screen. You must be watching it on YouTube, I'm assuming. So please enter your questions or whatever else you want to say about the sessions in the comment box that you see there, and we will pick it up and ask that of the speaker. Thanks. Over
they
to you,
haven't
Ranjit.
panelist Ankur, they have also got me as a moderator. I don't think I've ever done that till now. I've always been on the other side of the table, not this side. So let's get off. You have, I think, across different platforms now more than 2.8 million followers. Why publish a book?
Because the platforms, Ranjit, do a very poor job of surfacing the content once it has remained on the platform for a long time. So there is, for no fault of theirs, there is an over-indexing of recency, and recency often clouds our beliefs because it makes us feel that whatever we're going through right now is the only thing that matters. When the truth is, there have been thousands and thousands of years and millions of people who have gone and come before us, done commendable work, their life, their history, their experiences, all reach us because of a documented way, whether it's through books, it's through records, it's through folklore, etc. So I think a book is a wonderful way of just capturing a moment in time and letting it stay for a prolonged period of time. And that's why I think it was something that I didn't set out to do. But once it happened, I began to see the joy of it, given somebody who reads very actively. So I will admit I was not a believer when I started writing the book, and I thought that it would maybe not make a dent. But now that almost a year has passed by since the book's released, I stand as a convert, and I'll be the first one to admit a book is something that everyone, not just writers, and I don't consider myself as one, everyone in their life should attempt to write once in their life.
So should we expect you to be writing more books over the next few years, decades?
Boss, my publisher is a taskmaster. I love her for that. So she's like, "Hey, how many YouTube videos do you release every week?" And I was like, 3. I was like, "Well, that's awesome. You have to release a book a year as well." So I'm actually committed to writing a book a year. My next book should be out in December 2022. This is not a promotion. It's just a matter of fact statement. And if everything goes right, then you will see a book come out of me every December of every year.
That sounds great. I'm sure that there are a bunch of people here who have been or who would be excited to hear that they don't have to. So unlike R.R. Martin, they don't have to wait for 15 years to find the next book. So have you already announced what the book is going to be about?
Yeah, I briefly did that on my newsletter. The next book is basically a Q&A between a student and a teacher. I've had multiple teachers in my life, Ranjit, and most of them do not know me. I've learned a lot observing them, witnessing them, following them, and going through a round of questions and answers in my own head, which has helped me tremendously. So this book is a compilation of 35 life questions that most young professionals end up asking more often than not. How do I pick the right career? How do I make friends? How do I convince my parents of my career choice? How do I become my own best friend? And through a series of Q&A between a student and a teacher, I attempt to help people come up with their own answer. So that's the work of the book, and the title of the book is Get Epic Shit Done.
That sounds like an exciting way of telling a story, right? Very Buddhist way versus a classroom, like just one-way conversation way that, okay, this is how it is. Seems more like a more interactive form where people can almost put themselves into their student shoes and think that, okay, if this happens, then this happens.
Exactly. When you read books, you often realize, at least I do, that the book tends to become very repetitive. So one conscious call that I made when I was writing Do Epic Shit and when I was writing Get Epic Shit Done is I want to write books which don't have a start, don't have a finish. You can literally pick the book up from any page, start reading, not feel any obligation of finishing the book. And even if you consume a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, you will actually take away something, hopefully meaningful, for you to reflect upon. And that's how the book is structured. Even this one, it's 35 independent questions. There's no storyline. So if everything in your life is sorted, but the only thing that isn't sorted is you have a toxic manager and you don't have any idea how to deal with him or her, just go to that question, read that chapter. Within 5 pages or so, you will hopefully have an answer or a direction, and then leave the book and come back to it only when you have another question spring up in your life. And I like that. I like that easiness and that no pressure approach towards reading a book.
So a lot of most famous content creators typically over-index on one platform or one format at least. Like, so big writers will typically be big writers, but then they would be much less prolific on anything else. So yesterday I was speaking to Suren Mohan Pathak, who possibly is one of the most like active writers. He said that he has an internal deadline of every 2.5 months. He wants to publish a novel. But then the flip side to that is that he's not active anywhere else, like literally anywhere else. In your case, on the other hand, you are active on YouTube, Instagram, like almost any social platform that has large enough reach. Do you think these different activities they kind of build on top of each other? Do you think that they take away from each other? So like you do a podcast, you also do a video, you also publish a book. Do you think that makes the overall experience better for you as a creator? So we'll talk about audience as well, but just for you, do you think it's a net positive? It's a net negative?
I certainly believe that, Ranjeet. Every platform that I'm on has a very different persona. So on LinkedIn, for example, I have a persona of an entrepreneur and a leader. On Twitter, I have a persona of a thinker. On YouTube, I have a persona of a teacher. On Instagram, I have a persona of a wise friend. On a podcast, I have a persona of being vulnerable and frankly just sharing even my darkest secrets, if you will. And what I realize is, contrary to what most people will believe, there is very little overlap between the audiences. It's mostly additive. One, because the age is very different. Second, the persona or the appeal is very different. And third, the kind of content is thus very different. What it helps me do is, as a 42-year-old trying to mostly speak to 18 to 24-year-olds, I need to have a way of reading their mind through different angles. And these platforms allow me to do that because every piece of content is different, is structured differently, hits them very differently. And thus I get a lot of feedback on how it worked, why it worked, whether it didn't work at all. And it also gets me to think very deeply about what I'm sharing. So if there is, for example, something that I learned in my entrepreneurial journey, which I'm sure you also encounter every single day of being a startup founder, but you want to see how that one thing is not just limited to being a founder. It extends to being a manager. It then could extend to becoming a friend. It could extend then to becoming a friend for yourself. It could then extend to something which is self-reflected. And that one learning, which you may have had in your startup journey, suddenly has applications all through every possible relationship that you may have in your life. And that's very fascinating to me. It's very, very fascinating कि हम एक चीज देखकर उसको कैसे बहुत सारी और चीजों में apply कर सकते हैं. So being on different platforms really helps me, and I think it only enriches my own thinking.
Are there also any negatives? Again, just as a creator, not as a consumer. Like as one example, it could be sometimes you might just be conflicted, right? Like too much decision fatigue. That should I be like this? Should I be like that? Or something else.
I don't think there is a negative, but I will admit that there is a big caveat here. And the caveat is I'm a very process driven person. I'm an extremely process driven person. And I don't have any problem sticking to a routine. No, it's funny. This morning, for example, on LinkedIn, I shared my weekly routine, what I do on my weekdays, what I do on my weekends. And a very common response was, this looks boring. This looks very robotic, because I literally have time slots for everything that I do. But I love it. And it works wonderfully well for me. I'm not suggesting that's the only way it would work for anybody. Everyone will have their own way of making life work. But for me, what works is a routine. And because of this discipline that I have, I'm able to be very specific and very matter of fact when it comes to my content. So a lot of people would think, and for no fault of theirs, that I am 24/7 on social media. मेरी और जिंदगी में और कुछ चल ही नहीं रहा है, मैं 24 घंटों सिर्फ प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे सोशल मीडिया पे रहता हूँ. When the truth is, I spend less than 10 hours a week on all of this content journey that has now happened. And it's only because I have a great team, so that helps, and I could invest in that, which is brilliant. My startup experience helped me a lot become a better content creator. And two, just process. So I often say this to my team: creativity is a process. Creativity is not your once flash in the pan moment where you come up with something viral and फिर तुम्हारी जिंदगी बदल जाएगी. Creativity is something that you do clinically every single day of your life. Much as the example that you shared before, 2.5 months for every novel. That's it. That's creative. Does it mean that they are poor renditions of somebody's work? No. It's just converting it into a process. So I don't know of any pitfalls, and I'll be complaining if I shared any.
It makes sense. I think I definitely agree that people have to figure out what works for them. I don't think like there is anything right or wrong with publishing one book in 5 years or 10 years, or anything wrong with publishing one in 3 months. I do think that if you try to be someone who you are like just internally not, then it becomes complicated. But honestly, like just thinking about it makes me feel a little bit about decision fatigue. But I think once you have a routine and you are following that, then you are basically solving for decision fatigue as well. That if you don't have to decide, then I think it becomes a little bit easier. So maybe that is the secret to, well, not feeling fatigued by doing so many different things. I have a question for you as a consumer. So you also, I'm assuming, consume content in different formats, everything from audio to video to text, of course, in the form of books or blogs. What is your favorite format for one, learning, and two, entertainment as a consumer? Like which one do you personally prefer?
Learning, hands down, books. I'm a student of books. I have benefited immensely from them. I'm also a very fast reader, and that's happened over years. So I can consume books rapidly. I have a way of retaining what I have consumed, and that works for me as well. And I very quickly dismiss books if they can't hold my attention. So I don't feel any guilt whatsoever in dropping a book. And I feel the biggest reason why most people don't like books is because they buy a book and then they put this undue pressure on themselves to finish it because they feel that that's the morally right thing to do. So that is certainly my way of learning. I also learn a lot by observation. So I love Twitter. I love LinkedIn. I also, to some extent, like Instagram and YouTube. While ironically, I don't consume a lot of Instagram and YouTube. I don't. I consume a lot of my feedback, but not other creators as such. But I do learn a lot from there. Entertainment is, I love Instagram Reels. I have an hour in a day just dedicated to Instagram, of which I would say about 30 minutes goes towards Reels. And my Reel feed has now become a mix of fun, stand-up, motivation. I love for some, not, I shouldn't say for some reason, I absolutely love reality television music shows, whether it's in Hindi or in English. So America's Got Talent, Indian Idol, or somebody just singing somewhere a different rendition of a song. I love music. And I particularly like it when people bring their own skill to it. So that's my entertainment.
Okay, sounds good. Another question that I have, something that we have started seeing a little bit. So we have always seen that some books or comicses get converted to movies or shows and stuff like that. But now we have started seeing a little bit more complicated uh, or intricate relationship where people are essentially utilizing concepts that they are using for, let's say, a podcast, and that becomes a book, and that becomes a movie or a web series or a documentary, and vice versa. So it's not just that books and comics is a source of IP and then you make movies and that's it. It's like sometimes things can start as a podcast and then go to become books, or something can start as a book and then go on to become a comic or a movie or something else. uh, have you utilized this already within your journey, that you have learned something or created some content for, let's say, a course, or while you were teaching a group of students, and then those concepts became the basis of either the book, or they will become the basis of a book, or vice versa, that while writing the book you learned something that you hope to now utilize in a podcast or in a course?
That cross pollination continues to happen on a daily basis, Ranjit. There'll be so many things that I would come up with as a content creator, and while thinking about it, I will immediately start thinking of how it could be replicated somewhere. For example, I let's say be recording a YouTube video which is typically between 15 to 20 minutes, but while recording it, there'll be a moment which I feel is just so important as a takeaway that I feel, oh, this could be really good as an Instagram reel as well. And that'll be like 60 seconds at best, mostly 40 to 50 seconds. And then I will be like, oh, within that, this one statement that I said was even more powerful. And then I will convert that into a tweet, and that will just be a quote. My podcasts are usually just a monologue, and it's just rambling in the sense I think of a topic and I just speak for 7 to 10 minutes. If I make any errors, let it be. If I say something which is incoherent, let it be. I just want it to be as raw as possible. But very often when I'm going through that podcast, because it is raw, because it is not thought through as such, there are no pointers, I end up processing a lot in my own head about a topic that I was speaking on. And that then helps back into maybe the YouTube video or anywhere else. So the beauty, and this is another positive, the beauty of creating content across so many different platforms, and it's not so much the platform, but different media types. You are creating long form content, which is 15 to 20 minutes. You're creating short form content, which is 3 to 5 minutes. You're creating micro content, which is 60 seconds. You're creating text micro content, which is just tweets and quotes. You're creating incoherent content, which is podcasts. You're then summarizing all of that in, say, a book. I write a newsletter every day, and that is, again, me just going through it. But because it's written, it's a very different level of cohesion there. So there are a lot of these mechanisms that just help bring together my thought process and my understanding of something that I thought I knew.
Okay. Since this is a literature festival, I'm assuming that a lot of audience would be more interested in that side of the story. So I'll take 5-7 minutes talking about questions that I think folks who I think are in the audience might prefer more. If you're advising a new writer, like somebody who wants to write business books, for example, do you think that they should be on some of these platforms, including social platforms, but also like a podcasting network, or like writing a newsletter or things like that?
I'd say yes. And the reason I say yes is when you look at the best performers in the world, you will always, if you go deep into their work, realize before they put out their best work, they have actually tested that work several times before. It's true for stand-up comics. It's true for music artists. It's true for even actors. It's true for any form of performing art where the one hit that you saw from them has actually gone through multiple iterations in a much smaller group. So stand-up the term is open mic. And that's what people do before they go to the big stage where people would pay for it and then root for their success and go and applaud. They would have done several of these open mics in very small groups, 10, 15 people, trying to figure out where the laughter came in, what was the punchline like, what vibed, what did. And I'd say that should be true for any author as well. There isn't any difference. So I remember when I started writing Do Epic Shit, it just started by saying, hey, let's just go back to all the content we've created over the last 3 years and see which part of it resonated the most with people. And let's just bring all of that in one go. That was the first iteration of the book. And then you have to sit down on it and just characterize it, make it into a cohesive unit, give it structure, give it some sort of a rhythm, if you will. The good thing was the book lacked rhythm by design. It wasn't meant to be rhythmic. It was meant to be just one page at a time, one page at a time. And depending on whether you've read books or not, it could either be a very quick read, people would finish it off in like 2 hours, or very slow because people would just reflect and take a lot of time in reflecting. And that just came about. But most of this was just tried and tested. It's the same thing with Get Epic Shit Done as well. The Q&A, the selection of the 35 questions are the 35 questions that most people end up asking me time and again. And my responses to those and their responses back to my response formed the Q&A of that chapter, that book. And it has in some way been tested already.
Interesting. So when I ask this question to other people one-on-one, generally people think that the main reason why you should be on a platform is to, or other social platforms, is to basically build relationship with your consumers or your readers in this case, which of course helps with sales, but it also helps with getting more direct feedback, right? In print books, typically, even if you sell 1 million copies, you get very limited feedback from some of those people. But on social platforms, you can do that. But it's an interesting
Absolutely.
point. It's probably valuable even before you write something, because as you rightly said, you can actually test out different theories. You can actually test out what works, what doesn't work. So it's not just about generating demand or getting feedback from demand, but also probably starts even before that. So that's, I think, a very interesting point of view. Someone has asked in the chat, are your books an extension of Nike's Just Do It principle?
I don't know, but you know what? This is a fun fact, and I have to admit this. For the longest time when I was growing up, I wanted to get a tattoo. Now I don't anymore, but I wanted to, and I knew what the tattoo would be. The tattoo would be the Nike swoosh, because I have been deeply influenced by the Nike approach of just do it, and I think a part of my DNA is just around that. So I wouldn't dismiss this notion entirely. In fact, I'm quite surprised that someone even noticed it to the point of sharing it. But I think subconsciously there is a part of me that's like just aligned to that. And I love this one quote by Phil Knight, who's the founder of Nike, who said that if you have a body, you can be an athlete. And it's as simple as that. And I do believe that that's true for everything and for everyone. If you have a mind, you can be anybody that you wish to be. And it's more often than not our own mindset that's stopping us from becoming who we would want to become. And by that measure, if there is anything that my content could help, then I find myself very grateful.
Two different people have, by the way, thanked you already for giving them confidence that they should not feel guilty if they are not, if they have bought a book and they are not reading that.
That's quite liberating, by the way. Whenever people hear this, they're like, oh, thank God. I thought I'm the only one who does it. But thanks for making it normal.
I've been doing that since I know. Like, it's like, okay, I bought the book because I thought I might like it, but now I did not buy the book to be tortured. Like, what is the point? I've already paid the money. Now I should also pay with my money, my time. If I'm enjoying it, of course, it makes a lot of sense. But if I'm not, then that's just double investment instead of having single investment.
That's so true. That's so true.
So someone else has asked, what are your current favorite reads? Actually, let me put it into two parts. Something that you have read in the last 1-2 years, and something that you might have read whenever, but it's like one of your all-time favorites.
All right. Something that I've read in the last 1 to 2 years decisively, this book by Kapil Gupta called Atmaman. I believe it's one of the most underrated books that I've ever read. Naval Ravikant's mentor is Kapil Gupta. So I've been following Kapil Gupta for a really long time. He's written some wonderful books. The best one of which I had read earlier was The Direct Truth. I had no idea about this book that he had written called Atmaman. And I don't remember where it was, but some conversation, Naval referred to the book Atmaman. I looked it up. I couldn't even find it anywhere. And then I looked up, and I suddenly found one copy, read it, and it just blew my mind. It is one of the most hard-hitting books that one would read. I think there is a time and moment for that book. I could not have appreciated that book when I was in my 20s, but now that I've lived life and I've seen a lot, I think this book just landed so well on me. So I'm grateful for that book. I also all-time, it's very hard to pick up all-time favorites, Ranjeet, but I'll tell you which is the most gifted book. I love gifting books, and I believe that if I can do anything to make people read more, then that is absolutely my honor. And the most gifted book in my world would be this book called Rework. It's by Jason Fried and DHH, who are founders of this lovely company called Basecamp, earlier 37 Signals. And I read this book in 2009 when I just become an entrepreneur and just fundamentally changed the way that I think about life. It's essentially a book that's challenging the notion of work as we know it and as society describes it for us. So that is one of my most. It is the most gifted book. Will be closely followed by Atomic Habits and the Hard Things About Hard Things, which is again about entrepreneurship.
Almost all three are classics. Rework, of course, a little less known than other two, but still all three pretty good books.
Yeah.
Given that I think we are coming closer to the end, if you could go back, let's say 15, 20 years, and not as a founder, but as a content creator, and you can pick what kind of content creator, what would you have done differently? And what would you definitely have not changed, even though other people, like I'm sure that there would be things that people would say you should do that you disagree with. So what is one thing that you would definitely not have changed, even if you went back 10 years, knowing what you all do? And second, that like, what would you actually do change?
Sure. It's easier to answer what wouldn't change. Definitely, I wouldn't create content that I don't align with. It goes back to something that you mentioned early on, Ranjeet, that if you create content that is not you, you will start creating crappy content. And it will start becoming forced. People will see through it, and that's the end of it all. So it's very important, at least to me, that I remain authentic to my own self, remain honest to my own self of what is it that I want to create content on.
Sorry to interrupt. Do people really advise you to create content, or like has anybody advised you to create content that you don't align with?
Absolutely. All the time. There are, like, for example, there are a lot of people who say, why don't you vlog? Like, we would love to know how a life in, day in the life of Ankur Warikoo is and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I cannot vlog for the love of me. One, I'm not Gen Z enough to even understand how to hold that camera and point, blah, blah, blah. I have someone who would follow me if I'm going for a day event or I'm going for a talk and somebody, and he does a great job of vlogging, and we might put that up, but I can't vlog. I can't stream. I can't game. I can't do. People find my content witty, and I have a very poor quality of jokes, but somehow people laughed at them. And they're like, no, why don't you do reaction videos? Like, why don't you pick up somebody else's video and then react to that video? I'm like, boss, that's not me. That is not who I am. And a lot more and a lot more and a lot more. People also, and this is a big thing that I had to do. I will be one of the older content creators at this scale. Most content creators at a very big scale are young, and rightfully so, because this comes naturally to them. Because I'm old, there is this vibe check that people have to go through and literally pass. They're like, why don't you do content which is aligned to your intellectual understanding? So one part of content is I teach people about compounding, simple interest, EMIs, or tell them basic things about here is what to do in the first 90 days of your first job. Here is how you should think about your work, blah, blah, blah. Or the other is, hey, why don't you do podcasts with deep thinkers? Why don't you go and run a English channel with your views on entrepreneurship and startup and so on, so on, which is intellectually very high up. And I don't want to do that because I think people at my age, like people like you and I, we've already understood a fair bit. So I certainly don't want to be making a 1% change in Ranjeet's life, because Ranjeet is already at that 99 percentile, if not 100. तो उसकी जिंदगी में बदल के मुझे नहीं लगता कि मुझे कुछ मिलेगा. But I would love to make a 10% shift in somebody who's at the 60 or 70 or 80 percentile. Because I know that collectively could amount to a lot more than otherwise. And that's something that I wouldn't do as well. Something that I would is exactly the same thing that I said. I started creating content, for example, on YouTube in 2017. And that was all about entrepreneurship. It was in English. It was very highbrow. It was very intellectual. Not to suggest that what I'm doing right now is not, but it was meant for a very different, rich audience. And I got success in there, but it wasn't meaningful impact, at least in my definition. And once I made those conversations, those changes, then it was a different journey altogether. Like speaking in Hindi, making it very, very acceptable, making it okay to make mistakes. As a 24-year-old, drop down to the understanding and experience of a 21-year-old and try and explain life the way that they see it, not the way that you've seen it. Those will be the things that I would have done much earlier, and I wish I did.
So essentially focusing on making a significant impact into people's lives versus marginal impact. Like even if
Yes.
I learn something new, it's probably going to be 1% change versus like me 20 years back or 10 years back, it would probably have been 20-30% change.
Correct. Exactly. Not be elitist for sure.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for joining us here. On that note, and I'll let the organizers take it from here. Ganesh, are you there?
Yes. Thanks, Ranjeet and Ankur. Thank you so much for that wonderful, from the heart conversation. And, I don't believe content is king anymore. I just don't believe that. I think content is the new weed, man. Everyone is high on content, and why not? And your conversation has driven home for all of us here, especially for me, some points about how you can, what you should really focus on in genuinely creating content that's aligned to your strengths and your personality, and how I think, Ankur, how you can build your online presence and followership on that basis. So I think this conversation, Ranjit, and between Ranjit and you is especially useful now, very, very topical, because I think a lot of people do think that shortcuts work all the time. I do find that there is this euphoria about taking shortcuts, and then there is deep dejection at things not working out. So thank you so much for that conversation, and have a lovely evening. I hope both of you will continue to watch the remaining sessions.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Ganesh. Thank you so much, Ranjit. It was a pleasure. All the best.
All right. So on that slightly doped note, let us move to the next session. This one is going to be, I think, very, very close to the heart for a number of us here, definitely for me. And for you, if you've been following the Indian publishing industry, not even really following, but, just picking up books and reading over the years. Because in the next session, we're going to hear the story of a publishing house that extremely close to my heart and to the hearts of millions of Indian readers. Heck, they were the rock star Indian, publishing imprint. And for a long time, they were held right up there. They showed us the way. They did a lot of good publishing work. And they brought out very many interesting titles over the years. So in the next session, which is about the Westland Saga, we're going to hear how a small family-run business, a publishing business, went to the heights, scaled the heights that it did. And in doing so, what were the turns, the twists, the ups, the downs, and there were many of them that they had to navigate. That's what we're going to hear in this superb conversation between Benedict Paramanand and Gautam Padmanabhan. To anchor this, I welcome on screen, I can't say on stage, on screen, Benedict Paramanand. Hi, Ben. Hi. So Benedict Paramanand, or Ben as we call him, is a media entrepreneur in the advocacy and impact space. He covers sustainability, green business, social entrepreneurship, and business literature a lot. And he's had a long career in media and as a journalist. He's the editor of the magazine Sustainability Next, the founder of This Fest, BBLF, as we heard earlier, and of a festival Sustainability Next, the founder of This Fest, BBLF, as we heard earlier. There seems to be a problem in what I'm saying. Next, the founder of This Fest, BBLF. Sorry. And there seems to be a problem. Next, the founder of This Fest. Sorry. And there seems to be a problem. Next, the founder of This Fest. There was a bit of echo, so sorry about that interruption. I think that's gone now. I hope I'm audible. So, like I was saying, Benedict is the editor of the magazine Sustainability Next, the founder of BBLF, and of Greenlit Fest, which focuses on sustainable literature. He's the author of the books C.K. Prahalad, The Mind of the Futurist, and Smash, The Rise of Indian Badminton, Stories of Grit and Triumph. Apart from that, he's my part-time, once in a while, a beer and old monk drinking buddy. So it's a pleasure to know Ben. I've known him for 8 years, ever since this fest began. It's a pleasure to invite him on screen to anchor this conversation with Gautam Padmanabhan. Ben, please unmute yourself and your life. Over to you. Ben, can you hear me? Just a minute, folks. We seem to have a technical issue, so we'll start in a minute or so. Just a minute.
Yep. Hi, Ganesh.
Finally.
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
sir.
I was trying to get Gautam in,
Acha.
so he had a bit of a challenge.
Okay. Yeah, he's online now.
Yeah, so I missed
yes,
you. I
over to
missed
you, Ben.
you. I missed you introducing me though, while trying to
Ah,
fix this.
nothing you haven't heard before, so that's okay.
Okay, so
Yes, so over to you.
yeah, thanks a lot, Ganesh. Uh, s- it's gone well so far.
Absolutely.
Welcome, Gautam.
Yeah, hi, Benedict.
Hi. Okay, so let me start it this way. That typically moderators say that speakers don't need introduction and then go ahead and reading their bios. But in Gautam's case, I must say that he does need an introduction. Not so
Sure.
much because not so much because he hasn't accomplished enough, but because he's such a shy guy and he stays out of the limelight. So I have to introduce him a bit. Hope you can bear with it, Gautam.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm honored to be on a fireside chat with you. Uh, so let me start with saying that it won't be an exaggeration if I introduce you as one of India's most accomplished publishers. Uh, Gautam has witnessed a complete cycle, so to speak, of the evolution of the publishing industry from a small office in Chennai in 1987 to becoming one of India's top five brands and published several bestsellers. I've known Gautam from 2014 when he published my book, C.K. Prahalad, The Mind of the Futurist. Thank you for that, Gautam.
It's our pleasure.
So I also have to mention here that Westland was one of the early sponsors of BBLF in 2015. That was quite helpful, Gautam. Thank you. Yeah. So let's start off with Ganesh. Can you put the Outlook creative there? I mean the picture. Yeah. Okay. Let me start with this question, Gautam. That you are known to create Aam Janta writers, the likes of Amish Tripathi, Ashwin Sanghi, Rashmi Bansal, uh, Chetan Bhagat, Devdutt Patnaik. So take us through a bit of how did you do this?
I think one of the, I guess, the foundations of our whole business has been we started out as third-party distributors, and at one time we were distributors for most of the, international publishers like HarperCollins and Penguin Random House and many others. And one thing that really struck me was that when you look at the Indian bestseller lists in those days, it was dominated by foreign names. It was Ludlum, it was Jeffrey Archer, and so on and so forth. And I always felt that where are the Indian authors who can kind of, break into the top 10? And why is it that we don't have Indian authors breaking into the top 10? Chetan Bhagat was obviously an early mover. And it just so happened, I think our timing was right because that was around the time that Trent, who were our owners at that point of time, suggested that we get into publishing in a big way, rather than concentrating on third-party distribution. And I think the timing was just right. There were authors like Amish and Rashmi Bansal and Ashwin Sanghi who were just about going to emerge. And that was around the time we started seriously publishing. And we were on the lookout for such authors. And so I think it just happened at the right time.
Yeah, interesting. Uh, and they have gone on to sell hundreds of thousands of copies. Has it been a? It has been a financial success for Westland, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah. In fact, each of these authors, I mean, I think we really built our name, I think, on the back of these authors, on the success of these authors.
Yeah. So the connected question is, how do you pick them? There's an art, and you've been credited with the art of picking the bestsellers. How do you do that?
No, I think it was so now each one I think is a different story because I think the three names that you mentioned, two of these authors were self-published, so they already had some kind of a track record before we came on board.
Hmm.
I think with Amish, we definite and Rashmi, they both had self-published. With Ashwin, the story was slightly different. We actually had self-published the book for an international market and was just looking for a distributor in India. And at that point of time, he, gave us a copy of this book, The Rosabelle Line. And like I was saying, we were looking for that Indian equivalent of international bestsellers. And what struck us was that The Rosabelle Line was very much in the space of a Dan Brown, who had just hit the headlines with, the Da Vinci Code. So what we did was we actually got the book read by a team of readers, and of course that included my father and my wife and a few other friends who actually just read the book, and we read it, just to see if it was entertaining, whether the book, gripped us, and then we just felt that this is the right book to publish. And Ashwin was actually quite surprised because he actually approached us only to distribute the book, and we turned around and said, "Look, we'll publish it." So that's how we discovered Ashwin.
And some of them have written business books. How did you manage to do that?
Well, I think this whole, let's say, generation of writers came from a business background. If you take Amish, he's an IM product. Ashwin again comes from a family business background. So all of them had that business background, and I think the whole approach to uh, the marketing of books also was very different. In fact, Amish was probably the first author who sent me a presentation, a PowerPoint
Okay.
presentation on how to market the book. Which
Okay.
was like it was rare in those days. I mean, nobody shared presentations. I mean, this is
Yeah.
true of Chetan Bhagat again. He came from a business background. So I think it was just that. I think it was a combination of the writers, this whole new breed of writers coming from a business background. All of them had day jobs, and then who took to writing and then made a success of writing.
Mhm. Interesting. Uh, Somewhere I read that you follow this very interesting principle, author happiness mantra. Can you tell us something about it?
Okay. Well, again, I should quote another author, Ravi Subramaniam, who again comes from a business background,
Yeah.
who famously said that the author is the CEO of his book.
Hmm.
And I think that is an important lesson for publishers because end of the day, each book, each for the author, his or her book is actually like their baby, and it's so important for us to actually help them in achieving their dreams or their goals with that particular title. So I think author happiness starts with that understanding, and our attempt has always been to that whatever we promise to an author, first of all in terms of the marketing or way we would go about selling the book, we deliver on those promises, right from the quality of, let's say, the production of the book, the editorial inputs, the distribution and the marketing. Whatever we promised, we should deliver, and that's something that has been a mantra. I don't think it's just me. I think it's the whole organization. I think collectively, everybody in Westland have always had that belief, and any author can actually approach anybody in the organization and find out what is happening at any given point of time. And that's another important aspect, that we communicate and we're always ready to listen. I think that in a way sums up what author happiness is all about. And I think one of the interesting experiences in the last stint with Amazon was that Amazon actually had a author satisfaction score. They used to actually survey authors and on various aspects of the whole uh, publication process to understand what their feedback was, and if they didn't find things were working out, what went wrong or what went right. And I was really, I think as a team, we were really proud that we were averaging something like 95% on an author satisfaction score
Wow,
uh, over a period of the last 3-4 years.
that's so
So
amazing.
that's something that really satisfied us. Having said all this, I don't think any publisher can guarantee that that the book will be a success. It's only that we put in our best effort to make it work.
That's interesting. So, you're the only publisher in our eighth edition of BBLF. So, I'd like to ask you to take us through the publishing landscape in India today. How difficult is it for new authors to get in?
I think it is. It depends on what you're writing. I think it's much easier today if you're a non-fiction writer. I think most publishers are looking for non-fiction. I think it's much tougher to be a fiction writer in this current market. But I would not lose hope. I think these things are cyclical, and at some point, fiction will come back, into the limelight.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully so. Uh, okay, this
I also
question.
think there are other opportunities for fiction writers today. I think it's the way you tell a story. It doesn't need to always end up as a book. I think the OTT landscape has opened up a lot of space for new writers. There are, like, for example, the Pratilipi app and similar apps where people can actually write and actually monetize their writing. So I think
Mhm.
the opportunities are many. It's going to be very tough to be probably discovered in the traditional way, but I think there are several options today also for authors. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty optimistic about the landscape.
that's interesting. Uh, yeah, I've been waiting to ask this question. That you seem to like working with brands, corporate brands, unlike other publishers. You started off with Landmark, then Tata's acquired Westland, and after that, Amazon acquired you. That must have been a really high point in your career and life. Uh, Now that Amazon, uh, I don't want to say dumped you, but Amazon is not there now, and you moved to Pratilipi. So, is it a kind of a cycle from a startup to another startup? Can you just take us through this journey?
One of my favorite lines is that I'm one of the few people, like most people's career, there's a career path where you go from one place to another, different organizations, and go up the corporate ladder. In my case, I have stood in the same place. It's just the ground beneath my feet that keeps changing. So yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think any of these. I think each of these decisions were like opportunities or responses to challenges, and I think we have enjoyed each one of these. I have no regrets, and I think we are really quite excited with the current, you know, uh, 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 opportunity of working with Pratilipi, and we see a lot of synergy, and hopefully a lot of doing a lot of good things as we go along.
So just take us through that transition, uh, well-oiled publishing machine, and moving into Pratilipi, a startup. I'm sure it is exciting, but take us through that transition a bit.
See, some things have not changed at all, in the sense that we continue to publish the way we used to publish, say, even in Amazon or Trent. I don't think anything has changed on the ground as far as the way we publish books. But what Pratilipi does give us is the opportunity to look at content in all its forms. It's no longer just saying, okay, we're going to publish a physical book, and that, okay, there could be an ebook version of it, maybe an audiobook version of it. But today we can look at the fact that there's the option of actually converting a book into a podcast,
Yeah.
or converting a book into a comic, into a graphic novel or a comic, a digital comic. And down the line, there could be other opportunities like OTT or gaming, which will emerge. So I think it just kind of helps us to, kind of change our mindset in the way we look at content, and explore all these different avenues.
So yeah, you're also a big reader, I understand. Connected with business, this is a business lit fest. What are the best business books you have read?
I must confess that I haven't read that many business books. I tend to read more fiction and other subjects. There are a few which stood out for me. I definitely read both the books on Amazon. The Everything Store. That was a very interesting read.
Mhm.
I also read a book called Creativity Inc., which was about the whole Pixar story. So I
Yeah.
think the business books that I tend to pick up are in a way linked with the media. I remember I read another book on Netflix, on the early days of Netflix, by the co-founder of Netflix, not Reed Hastings, the other person. And even that I found very interesting. So I tend to read business books which are kind of allied with the media space.
So for the business book publishing genre as such, uh, wha- what are your suggestions for writers to make it work? Because it's still a small segment. Uh, they say that it's a best selling, it just sells 5,000 copies and they call it bestseller. How can we really take business publishing to the next level?
No, I think one of the challenges has been that while there are lots of interesting stories in terms of Indian business, and if today India is now ranked as the fifth largest economy, obviously it's been driven by many businesses. But somehow these stories are not being told, they're being probably told in a very, like it tends to be very authorized.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody tells a story what's and all. Unfortunately, the environment is also not so easy for authors to just write a book, which could have something negative about a particular organization. But that's a fact. I think if that would change, I think you could have a lot more interesting books, a lot more interesting stories coming out of India. And given the fact that there's so much of interest in Indian business, or Indian businesses are now going international, I only see a bright future for business writing from India.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good to hear. Uh, I mean, I was surprised you mentioned about the earlier writers who self-published their books and then you picked it up, because now the new trend is that self-publishing is a big thing. And where do you think it's going?
I think digitally it seems to have a brighter future at this point.
Mhm.
I think one of the challenges of self-publishing is the distribution and the marketing. And at this point of time, I have not seen much happening on that front. I'm talking about the physical distribution. Uh, but it definitely is an option for authors, because there are, let's face it, very few publishers. I don't think there are enough publishers to actually take care of all the manuscripts that are coming out. And like I said, self-publishing could be the start of being picked up by a more mainstream publisher as a second stage, or you could even succeed as a self-published author.
Yeah, I guess so. So you mentioned that Westland was good at keeping its promise, especially with marketing. But we have seen that most publishing companies really don't support authors with marketing effort. So how does I mean, how does one work this out?
See, one of the challenges of publishing is the margins. That the and if you look at the kind of discounts, and I'm not talking about online discounts here, but I'm just talking about the trade discounts, which is what is given to the distributors and the retailers. And if you look at the costs of publishing that and the small print runs, the money that can actually be allocated to marketing, even if you took a budget of say 10%, and like you yourself mentioned, if the average book is going to sell only 3,000, 5,000 copies,
Yeah.
you can just do the maths for yourself and say, see, how much is the budget that a publisher can really allocate to marketing.
Mhm.
So, that's I think it's one of the biggest challenges for publishers. I think the key thing that we try to do is to look at how we can leverage, say, social media, or use digital tools for marketing. Today, for example, on Amazon, you could use Amazon's marketing services to advertise. It's an evolving field as far as book marketing is concerned, but the biggest challenge is the budget.
Yeah. So let's take one audience question and then we'll wrap it up. We just have a minute. Any business literature suggestions translated from Indian languages? Gautam?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Uh, are there good business books that you have seen that have been translated from Indian languages?
No, honestly, I'm not aware of this. It doesn't mean that they aren't, but I'm not aware of any business book that was actually first published in an Indian language and then translated. If I'm right, there have been a few which Penguin picked up. They had this whole series, if I remember right, kind of a business library, where there were a few titles that were translated, if I'm right.
Great. So we'll close this with a big thank you, Gautam. And I'm sure you bring in the spirit of author happiness into Pratilipi as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Benedict. Thank you for having me on this.
Yeah, pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, Ganesh. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, thanks. Bye. Lovely. Another wonderful conversation. And that got Gautam talking about his journey, a bit of his journey, and how he looks at books and authors and the author discovery process. Some of it serendipitous as it panned out, but some of it not so. And it's been a great journey for them. And I really wish them, wish Westland, the brand, and their imprints a long and absolutely fruitful journey ahead. So I wish they'd keep coming up with all those exciting books in all their imprints for children, for books, for business, on sports, on anything else. Great. So it's time to move into the last session for the day. From all heart and soul and emotion and history and all of that, we're going to swing. The pendulum is going to swing to the other end now. We're going to talk about data. Yeah, so we're going to take a look at real hard data and see how that can be used, misused. Yeah, so all things are possible with data. Mining real data, navigating convenient untruths is going to take us into some of the gray areas, into some of the dubious areas, into some of the really troublesome areas. Related to data. So data is not just all fancy and hunky-dory, but let's look at the other side of data in this upcoming session. And for this, I welcome on screen Debleena Majumdar. Debleena, can you please come on screen? Yes, there you are.
Thank you.
Hi, Debleena. Welcome to the fest. It's a pleasure having you. So Debleena Majumdar has been working for the last 20 years in the fields of strategy, finance, and data science in companies such as GE, Fidelity, JP Morgan, and Prudential, all marquee names. She's the co-founder of Kahaniyah, through which she helps simplify strategy using data storytelling. She contributes data-driven analytical articles to Economic Times Prime. Her first published book was a crime novel called A Marketplace for Murder, about murder set in the age of fragile digital identities. Her last book, or the latest book, is Sabu. I won't say last book, many more to come, I'm sure. So the latest book is Sabu, the story of India's first actor in Hollywood. Both these books are slated for digital adaptations, so congrats for that, Debleena. Huge congrats. She's writing more books and digital adaptations on topics involving finance, history, and crime, two of which are expected to release later this year. Absolutely happy having you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to anchor this conversation, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ganesh, and thank you, Benedict, and real honor to be here. I hope everybody can hear me clearly.
Yes, yes, yes.
Great. So thank you so much. So while we are going to navigate the convenient untruths, we're also going to talk about how data navigates inconvenient truths. And from hard data to the heart of data is what we will try to cover in this discussion. So just to introduce a little bit, long time back, Aristotle, very wise man, had said something really wise. He talked about the three keys of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos was credibility, pathos was the emotional connect, and logos was the logic. So now, when I think back, and particularly in the context of this session, what I feel is persuasion is even more important today. And using data should actually help us cross the bridge when it comes to persuasion. But what really makes it real? To answer that question, we have two fascinating panelists in this discussion today. And I'm very proud to invite Rukmini S. She's a data journalist, very well known data journalist, having written for premier publications. She's also the author of a fascinating book called Whole Numbers and Half Truths: What Data Can and Cannot Tell Us About Modern India. Welcome, Rukmini.
Thanks very much for having me, Debleena.
Thank you. And we are joined by Govindraj Ethiraj. Many of us would have heard of him, many of us would have read the articles. He's a journalist and he's a founder of the stupendous website called IndiaSpend. Welcome, Govindraj.
Thank you, Debleena.
Right. So, what's been fascinating for me as we set up this panel and thought about this discussion is that both of you, Rukmini and Govindraj, you've actually looked at data at a pan-India level and looked at it for issues which can really drive both behavioral change as well as policy change. And I'm sure that is not an easy journey. So today we're going to dig a little bit more into what makes it happen and what can make it really click. So Rukmini, let me start with you. In your book, you've kind of intricately woven this relationship between data and inconvenient truths. And let me just take one example. I love this chapter which you had on employment. I loved all the chapters. But on this chapter, you actually said something around the real problem around unemployment is not about lack of just jobs, but also about suppressed data. So maybe if you could please share, Rukmini, how one of these influences and overlaps into the other, and I think more about your experience through data journalism and through navigating inconvenient truths.
Thanks very much, Debleena, and that's a great question. I think employment and data around labor is not something that's picked up often enough, and it's an exciting area to talk about. I think one of the things that happened, say, 3 years ago, is that there was a sort of sense, and I'd say maybe even a narrative created, that the real issue around employment in India was not so much that there is unemployment or a lack of data, but that data was doing a poor job of capturing new India and new India's new jobs. I think this was a sort of, very purposefully created narrative. And in a sense, what this narrative did is it made people like us, all three of us here, who look at data, take a real hard look at what data can really tell us about labor in India and whether this narrative was based in fact or not. And in a sense, some of these numbers bring me to one of the central points that I do try to make in the book, which is that sometimes in our skepticism around numbers, I find that people, particularly younger people, have a sense that there is no good data at all in India. And in some ways, perhaps it's something of a failing on the part of even journalists if we've gone so far in terms of skepticism to almost create cynicism among people that there isn't good data. So one of the points I do try to make around data around employment is that there is some good data. Our national statistical architecture that has its roots in India's founding movement really can tell us very vital truths about the way jobs work in India, truths that our own bubbles and our front pages would never normally tell us. But yes, let's also accept that there are problems with the data. Some of it is that our architecture has just not kept up to date with some of the changes that are needed, which is not to say that it doesn't cover jobs, your Ola, Uber. They are very much covered within boring old national statistics. But there is also a question of data not coming fast enough. And one of the things that happened in 2019 was very much it ties in very well with the topic of our conversation today, because it was a case of inconvenient truths and data shining a light where the government at the time and the government at the moment did not want a light shine on that at the time. So the official numbers that came out clearly showed a 45-year high in unemployment at the time. And what the government did was essentially to say that there was a problem with the numbers and just sit on them for as long as it took to get an election out of the way. Then the numbers were released and they did essentially say what news reporting had shown. So in general, I think that there's sometimes an overemphasis on lying and manipulation. I don't think that's the biggest problem with Indian data. I don't think outright manipulation is a big problem. But when you do things like this, when there is very active suppression of data, then it builds into the sort of cynicism around numbers that people like all of us here are trying to push back against. So that's real damage.
Agree completely. I think that's real damage, and like you mentioned, Rukmini, the road from data to actually the narrative, and how people probably have a hypothesis and they are hell bent on proving that hypothesis. And we all know, you torture data enough, it confesses. So that kind of, plays probably an even bigger role than the lack of good or appropriate data. So with that, Govind, I think I just wanted to kind of drill into some of the work you've been doing at IndiaSpend, where you're building narratives from ground up. A lot of the research is done ground up, and then you're using data to build narratives. So would just love to hear your journey lessons, Govindraj, as you build IndiaSpend and develop this. And particularly maybe one topic I wanted to highlight, one article I found in IndiaSpend, and I hope many people read it. This was not the usual trope around why the world should look at organic farming. This actually was about Punjab and why the move from chemical farming is actually very difficult, and there was a complete data driven narrative around it, which I found very interesting. So maybe, if you can share your overall journey and learnings, Govindraj, and also how your journalists can identify and work on such data driven narratives. And what's the kind of feedback you actually get when you're also trying to shape inconvenient truths through these data driven narratives?
Debleena, thank you very much. Thank you to the Bangalore Literature Fest for inviting me and all the organizers as well. So, we are more than 10 years old now. So we've been doing this for about 10 years. And in that 10 years, we've gone through different kinds of phases and settled down to one phase or era today, which may or may not change again. So in the beginning, we used to only look at data because that was also driven by our lack of resources to do anything else. So we would look at government data. And at any point of time then and now, I think there's far more government data, whether it's federal or state-wise, then people like us have the time or the ability to analyze. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. So while you may look for a particular thing, Rukmini mentioned unemployment, which you may not find or you may not be happy with it. But the fact is, in general, there is a lot of data going around. And maybe there's not enough processing capacity either within the journalism fraternity or the research fraternity and so on. So that's one point. The second is, I think, as we've learned and continue to learn, it's important to tell stories with data. So even our tagline, in a way, is that we use data to tell stories in public interest in areas like health, education, environment, and gender, primarily, and occasionally in agriculture and a few areas like you referred to. Uh, I think our journey in a way is mixed. I think at one level it reflects the fact that many people are more comfortable with data than they were earlier. Second is that there are more questions about data that are being asked, and that can go both ways because people, at some point can start disbelieving the data and be more convinced about a narrative that might be going into that data point. And I think that there was an example used just now as well. But overall, I would say that I think there is a spread of using data in general, but equally, I think there is because there is so much of, I mean, some data, usage of data. People are also asking questions about other kinds of data which may or may not be available. So, I'll give you one or two examples, which in a way, and there is one example that I use very often because it came very early in our journey, and it also defined how we form opinions or biases. And sometimes data does not change that, and that's also an equally important lesson. So let's go back to 2012-13, when there was a famous or infamous rape in Delhi, and there was
Yeah.
the big narrative that built up was that Delhi was the rape capital of India. And when we looked at NCRB data at that time, which many people were not looking at that time, we found that Delhi, in terms of reported rape cases, was not the number one city in the country. It was actually number three. And there was one city from MP, or I think two cities from MP, which were actually ahead. Now, if you were to obviously dive deeper into that, many more questions come up, right? So, how many rapes or crimes against women are actually being reported? And maybe Delhi reflects the fact that they're not being reported, unlike, let's say, another state that reflects the fact that they are being reported. So that's one kind of question. The other question, I think, which became quite apparent even to, both data and other social commentators, was that what is the nature of crime against women in this country? So one of the reactions, the public reactions when that happened, and this happens every time, by the way, is that, okay, we need to step up policing, we need to have better quality, we need to have more women in police stations, we need to have round the clock patrolling, and so on. Very physical response to the problem. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. That's a good ask. And if you have the resources, surely you should have better better distribution of gender in police stations, and better patrolling and so on. But the thing is that, as data showed then and continues to show today, about 93 to 95% of cases of crimes against women, the victims are known to the perpetrators. And therefore, so this is not so much of a physical patrolling problem as it is a social problem. Now, which comes to the next question, which is that, are we willing to accept that this is the nature of the social problem? And then if so, what are we doing about it? So it actually moves from, let's say, a Ministry of Home Affairs to someone else. Maybe Ministry of Child and Welfare Development, maybe something even more macro. So this gives you an insight into how data can start the process of going down a path, which then leads you to many more paths, all of which you should be willing to walk through with an open mind and eyes, so to accept everything and then build an hypothesis or a public policy reaction, which is what we are talking about in this case. Let me give you another example again, because we worked a lot and it became sort of well known. Was when we ran an air quality monitoring project in 16-17. And what we did was, one of the things it was very obvious then, was that people internationally, journalists, were writing about poor air quality in Delhi, but there was no real data to measure it, except for one monitoring station which sat upon a US consulate in Chanakyapuri in Delhi, and one or two other boxes. So what we did was, we actually, thanks to a colleague who joined us, who was an IoT engineer, we actually built our own monitoring device. Thanks to the fact that sensors were available at very low cost, and we put a GSM machine into it, and we distributed it all over Delhi, and then subsequently also in other parts of the country. But most of our devices were in Delhi, essentially setting in friends' balconies so that it was protected from rain and so on. And we started measuring particulate matter 2.5 and 10. What we did then was, we beamed that image over the cloud onto a live map. So for the first time in this country, you could actually see real time air quality in different places. Then we tied up with Twitter. So what you could do is, you could say hashtag breathe Vasant Vihar, space Vasant Vihar, and Twitter, by working with us on the back end with another intermediary partner, would pull that data from that particular box and then send it to you back as a screenshot on Twitter. And you could see. So you would see that Vasant Vihar at this point is 210 on AQI. So one of the things that happened was, and it showed to us that data, when presented as cold, offline, in long Excel sheets, is not going to be consumed by anyone. And on the other hand, if you make it live, real time, and something that you can play around with, chances are much better. Air quality is something that we all obviously feel. So the cell was not so much, and there were other governments, both state and central, who were and the center, who were working on it at that point of time. So it kind of became a bigger and bigger issue. So much so that today air quality is what I would call a page one data point, along with your, let's say, temperature and so on and so forth. So at least you know now. Has enough been done to fix air quality? I think some has definitely been done, partly because of the public outcry that followed, that sort of not followed, but happened also that 16-17 period. And equally, the fact that now everyone could measure air quality. When you buy a, let's say, 10,000 rupees air purifier, usually it comes with an embedded air quality monitoring device. So you can see, and you can see how the system is changing. So that's one kind. I mean, that's another example of using data where, let's say, people at large who are affected can see it, and can, like I said, we made it interactive and so on. So therefore, a lot of people participate. If I fast forward to today, the example that I would quote, that I'd like to quote, is something that we've just launched called Chasing Methane. So now methane is the second largest greenhouse gas component after carbon dioxide. Most people don't know that. Methane emissions happen organically through agriculture, but they also happen through industrial emissions and so on. So we've set up something called methane.indiaspend.org, where we are tracking methane emissions, and we are updating this using satellite data. But we're working with the same former colleague and partners to set up to have real-time transmission of data from monitoring stations. This is a little more sophisticated than the air quality, but it works well. So the idea is, again, here to create awareness. Now, methane, like I said, is not AQI. I mean, you don't feel it when you're breathing or talking like you could in Delhi in winter, or you will in Delhi in winter just after Diwali. But methane is something that's important. So therefore, here is another example of where we are trying to use data. This is obviously, like I said, a project that's just started out, where we're trying to communicate the importance of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change by making you see a map, making you see how things are changing, and also showing you real-time data where we can on in this case methane. So these are the kind of illustrations about how you could use data. But just to sum up, I would always say, I mean, sum up this part, I would say that this is a journey for us. At no point can we say that we have achieved ideal audience penetration. The challenge, and it's not because the audience is at fault. The problem is that we have to keep looking for ways to make data more communicative, simple, and something that connects with people in the deepest way. Where you look at something and you say, oh, this is what is either affecting my life or something that I'm really charged about. So that is where our journey is so far, and hopefully we'll go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing it in such rich detail, Govindraj. And in fact, in a lot of my work in data storytelling, this is exactly what we see, right? And data storytelling is nothing but data with soul, right? You're getting to the soul of data. And, there was this old statistics joke which actually said that a man died while trying to cross a river that was on an average 6 feet deep. So a lot of times, there's a data literacy issue as well, and there's also a data narration issue where we try to go overboard with too much data. I know it's not easy for people to actually understand, and data storytelling is one way, which can simplify it, and we can use creative techniques like real-time data, simplification of data, maybe interactive data to actually make that happen. So that's really, really interesting. Rukmini, I'll come back to you. And, since we're talking about inconvenient truths in this session and data, I just wanted to also understand from you, some of the insights you shared actually were very hard to share. So maybe if you could also take us through one of the hardest insights which you had to share in the book. It could be on crime, it could be on, you spoke about marriage and even on caste. So if you could just give us one of the hardest insights and, how you kind of helped build that from data to narrative.
Thanks for that. I think the insights around marriage and caste are hardest for people to hear, though they weren't the hardest for me to communicate. In fact, I almost feel that, and this is a sort of good reminder of why you need good editors on books, and writers frequently take wrong calls or would take wrong calls left to themselves, is I really assumed that because I had been writing about this for so long, I assumed that these things about marriage and caste were so widely known that they would be of little interest to people. So it was also a lesson in humility to journalists like me, to know that things that you feel you've been banging on about for 10 years may have actually soaked into the minds of very few, and it's worth repeatedly making the point. The broad point around marriage and caste being that marrying within caste, endogamy is so deeply entrenched in India that our assumptions around change are actually a bubble effect. Many of us see this in our own bubbles and assume it to be more widely spread, but the truth is that young Indians essentially get married the way that their grandparents did, which is a highly endogamous within caste arranged marriage fashion. Under 5%, maybe 4% of marriages were intercaste among people currently in their 90s, and it's a similar percentage now. So if that number seems incredible, it's probably a reminder of how tight your bubble is, rather than how bad the statistics would be my argument. But I think the number that was hardest, or the sort of insight that was hardest to communicate, was around crime. And in a way, it sort of springs off the point that Govind built.
Yeah.
And like IndiaSpend and like Govind's team, I too in 2012-13 was trying to think of ways to tell a story that it was apparent was much bigger than what the NCRB numbers were telling us. And one of the sort of insights I had going into the NCRB numbers was that using police statistics or FIRs as a proxy for the actual prevalence of crime is always going to be a problem in India, because the police station is a site of societal interaction as much as anywhere else. It isn't a site of pure scientific number creation. So I did know from having been a field reporter that uh, uh, that considering the FIR to be the building block of police statistics, on the basis of which we all seem to be forming notions around women's safety, around the relative ability of states to keep women safe, around women's agency, around what laws should be, all of that seemed like a very sort of dangerous direction to be going in. So what I ended up doing was that I tried to look at court records, which, although imperfect, seemed like one step better than looking at police statistics alone. So I ended up looking at one full calendar year of cases involving sexual assault of women in Delhi 7 district courts. And what I found was that over a third of cases that were fully tried actually involved consenting couples, often interreligious and intercaste, against whom charges of sexual assault and kidnapping had been filed by parents who were opposed to these relationships. So what that share of the numbers at least seemed to be pointing at was a criminalization of the expression of young love, in a sense, more than an expression, more than it being proxy for crime alone. I think it was hard to communicate for a couple of reasons. One is because, in a sense, it took you beyond the realm of what direct statistics seem to be saying. Secondly, I did want to be very careful to not allow this to be seen as shorthand for false cases. These aren't false cases filed by women trying to get men into trouble, which is a popular narrative among men's rights activists, but as they call themselves, men's rights activists. But it was a crime being, the charges were being filed against the men, but essentially it was the criminalization of this relationship that the numbers were reflecting. So that was a sort of delicate line to tread, to make it quite clear that a crime was being committed and recorded here. It just wasn't the one that the IPC code was talking about. So I think that was a particularly hard insight to convey. Though I have to say that I take worrying about implications only so far. I think beyond a point you have to uh, do your due diligence, and then let those numbers out into the world, and not sort of endlessly worry about them. So or at least I had the luxury of being able to do that. So I would say the crime one was the hardest to communicate, while the marriage and caste ones, and more than that, I think one of the insights in the book that I have realized has troubled people the most is around the broad range of beliefs of young people as evidenced from opinion polling, because most opinion polling systematically over the last several years, decades, has shown that younger people do not profess more quote unquote progressive views than older people, although that is an assumption about the broad sort of arc of history, that as countries get richer, more urbanized, more westernized, younger people will move towards more progressive values. We've seen from the numbers for a while that that's not happening. We shouldn't be surprised, even when we look at the world around us, that that's not the direction that's going in. So from an audience point of view, I think that was the hardest insight for most people to come to terms with.
Right, right. No, I think that's so fascinating because that's a true picture of how data, narrative, bias, and inconvenient truth, all of that kind of interact and overlap, right? Some of it is surprising to us as custodians of data, as investigators of data, and some of it is to the audience. So I think a similar question, Govindraj, I think coming to you. Maybe you could also, you spoke about the methane story, which is probably an example of this. But any story where your team and you found something very counterintuitive from data, and it could be inconvenient, it could even be probably potentially damaging to some groups. But what helped you tell that story?
So, I mean, we tell stories as a matter of course. I mean, we put out one story every day. We have two kinds of audiences. So, one is what I would call broadly public policy audiences. Also, a lot of institutions worldwide cite us now, academic institutions. And that's become a core constituency which we didn't know was there as such. And we also have publishing partners. So, many of the online sites like Scroll, First Post, or newspapers like Business Standard and others publish our stories or republish our stories. So we have two kinds of audiences. So that's how it spreads. So the I can give you many examples. So let me go to some what I would call one or two timeless ones. So
Right.
one timeless one which we did, I think, for the first time in 2018 was on how many people eat vegetarian food in India. Right. So the perception is that majority of Indians are vegetarian, and only a few people. So this story actually, which appeared in May 2018, I think, and I'm sure people. One thing you have to remember that people in the public policy space know most of this already, but it's really the larger audience, which includes, I guess, people like us in media who don't maybe know. So at that time, we found that about 80% of Indian men and 70% of Indian women consume eggs, fish, chicken, or meat occasionally, if not weekly, by using, we looked at national health data, and this is 2018. Subsequently, there have been many studies like this which have broadly pointed to the same thing. So similarly, other studies we've done, I think, have been around the incidence of disease. For example, even something like a chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, COPD, or lung problems. So basically, the whole shift from, let's say, uh, uh,
Communicable
disease that is
to,
transmitted.
yeah,
Sorry.
communicable
Yeah.
disease to the other
Yeah,
lifestyle disease.
communicable to incommunicable, which I think has happened somewhat silently, at least in terms of the larger discussion. So we've run a lot of stories on that. I can't think of any particular one, but again, that's, I would say, is counterintuitive somewhat. You would have not thought that more people now, if you look at all of that together, obesity, diabetes, COPD, and so on, is leading to more, let's say, either people falling ill and or even dying, then maybe other things. Even in the case, as COVID showed us, I mean, the people who are more likely to be affected severely by COVID were people who already had many of these comorbidities or prior conditions. So this is another example, I would say, of intuitive and counterintuitive. I think similarly we've done around uh, marriage. I mean, which communities see more marriages in terms of, let's say, a male to female male to female ratios. So I mean, I can get the data on that, but I find that there are two problems again. One is that people like us do these stories. Rukmini does these stories. Uh, uh, People talk about it, but exactly 6 months later, again, people will ask the same question, and even today, if you say that X number of people, I mean, more Indians are vegetarian than non-vegetarian, and South has a surprisingly large amount of non-vegetarian population, people don't believe it. So in a way, it goes back to, I think, the fundamental challenge, which maybe is where we started our discussion, which goes for all these data points. the bigger the data point, the more it's almost like it's less likely that people will believe and retain it, or sort of have it as a start point. So you have to go back and convince them all over again that this is what it's saying. And of course, it can happen that people don't believe the data itself. So, and then what do you do?
Correct, correct. I think that's a great segue into the question I wanted to ask next. And this could be for either of you or both of you. So we are talking about data, we're talking about bias, and we're talking about, people not believing data, especially when it's counterintuitive or, when it's surprising insight. So, Daniel Kahneman, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he spoke about these two kinds of thinking, systems one and systems two, and how decision making is a combination of both data and gut. And last few years, a lot of work has been done on these areas of behavioral nudges and how that can influence or shift behavior. So it's not just about communicating something; it's also about using these nudges, which we subliminally react to, and that makes it easier to kind of move the needle of persuasion or to really help people kind of understand and explore the narratives you're trying to share. So just wanted to understand, have you seen this being explored or have you explored this while you're shaping and building these narratives?
Yeah, so actually, one of the sort of, as Govind mentioned, there's a lot more data that we all now have access to, and that's being produced by governments. And I think that's important to make that point, because it's sometimes not acknowledged that there is much more data now than there was before. I also think that sometimes it's not always apparent how much data driven decision making is going on within governments, both at the federal level, both at the union level, as well as the state level. And that's something I've been surprised to see of late, which is to see what these insights from internal administrative data, how it is affecting small incremental changes that are being attempted within, say, government schemes or within the rollout. So those aren't the sort of psychological nudges in public behavior, but it is interesting to me to see the impact that it does have on small changes in schemes, for example. I think there have been a couple of attempts in terms of public policy to do this sort of nudge work. So I do remember that there was an attempt in Mumbai where there is a shocking number of people die in train accidents crossing the railway track. So I remember the civic administration tying up with an organization and attempting to use those insights to catch attention at the very moment that it's needed. I don't know if we see enough of that. I don't know what we know about its effectiveness, about whether that moment of decision making is more important, or the root issues of not having just enough time to cross properly. I wouldn't be able to weigh in on what level of this sort of nudge is needed. And I will also, I want to also bring in the issue of COVID data, because while this wasn't a question of driving changes in behavior, to me it stood out really as one of the unusual moments where reporting in a way was able to break out of the usual bubbles. And when I try and think about how it was that was able to happen, or why it was that happened, I think it comes down to one of the most valuable attributes of numbers and of data journalism, which is to be able to sort of confer personhood, validation, legitimacy to people through numbers. And while this is the very sort of fundamental of what numbers are supposed to do, they're supposed to count people. It doesn't always become that apparent that what these numbers are is an aggregation of people. But I think what happened with the COVID reporting was that there was a very wide sense across the country that large swathes of the population of loved ones across the country were being missed out by numbers. And what reporting was able to do was to be able to perhaps offer some validation to these feelings of people. So although typically I do think that along with all of the polarization that we're experiencing in our public discourse, we see this in the consumption of news, and that extends to data journalism as well, which is that it's hard to break past the usual bubbles and get people who
Yeah.
have opposing viewpoints to consume news from other news organizations. I think the COVID reporting was in a way able to do this because it came back to that sort of first principle of what numbers do, counting people.
Correct. Correct. Anything to add to that, Govindraj? And then we'll probably move to a couple of audience questions.
Yeah. No, I think Rukmini's covered that well. I mean, the example that I was going to say, and it also links to another point. The data comes very late. This 2011 census data is what we are still,
Looking at
working
now.
with slices and dices and so on, and many of those slices come quite late, or much later. I mean, and maybe for good reason because it takes time and so on. But I think clearly when clearly there is a innate demand for more real time, data or insights, I think including for policy response and policy making, I think it's important to respond faster. The example that the counterintuitive part, right? Child marriage. You would think that if you, school history books and so on, it's over and gone. And, the census data says that nearly 12 million Indian children were married before the age of 10 years. This is a story we did in 2016 based on
Yes.
2011 census data. But it was a slice that was just released, I think. And almost 84% of those 12 million are from the majority religion. So, and not something that would intuitively you would even believe, and you would actually maybe jump against that. So these are just another instance of where what might either not be visible or not apparent, but data could tell you something if you choose to accept or believe.
Correct. Completely agree. And we have two very interesting questions. Maybe we should take those questions. So once Benedict is asking, this is for you, Govind. When writers complain that access to data in India is tough, so a good research-based book is tough, do you think they're just being lazy?
No, I think I think Rukmini has written a very good book, and
I think the
it's
answer
I
is
think it's
Rukmini. I'm
sorry.
saying the answer is Rukmini.
Yeah. So yeah, but I mean I think more people could write, and it could be very specific. I mean I think she's taken the horizontal. They could be vertical. Someone, and maybe she herself will go into health or climate and so on. Yeah, I mean I think it's just not enough people focusing on this. I mean, like I said, we've completed 10 years in this space, and we are still amongst the perhaps the only one who's dedicated to this for good or bad. And Rukmini is amongst the few independent journalists who's dedicated to this. So we would all think and hope that, because sometimes ecosystems, the concept of ecosystem is when there are many people, and then I mean, as you know, in business, you can't, if you're the only person doing something, it's tough. I mean, you want more people around you who are doing similar things. You have cohorts, you talk to people, you discuss, you bounce around ideas. I've always been hoping that there more people pick up more things, more specific things, and then start asking the tough questions, if where they need to be asked. So I think we have a long way to go, and I don't think it's to do with lack of data that we've already talked about. I think it's just maybe interest. Maybe there is fear and apprehension. I've been a financial journalist, so looking at data per se is not difficult for me. I mean, if I used to look at balance sheets and so on, for me to, let's say, look at something, though I would still confess that I'm not so good at, let's say, crunching as many of my younger colleagues are, because they come trained. So as Rukmini is pretty good at crunching as well. So yeah, but I think that we need more. I mean, we need much more. We are a very, very big country.
If I
Any
could
thoughts
just
to add?
add to
Yeah.
that, yeah, I just wanted to also say that, there is often, I mean, I talk about tired narratives. I would say another sort of tired narrative that sometimes, newspaper editors and perhaps even book editors, though luckily not mine, uh, instinctively have, is to assume that numbers will put off people, numbers will be boring, readers don't want numbers. And I think, the success of IndiaSpend and the sort of hunger that many of us often see among younger people and students for factual things, for credible information, for numbers as well, should encourage more people to write, certainly, but should also encourage editors to not instinctively respond by saying that if it's numbers, it's going to put off people. Find a way to humanize it. How are you going to catch the reader? Nobody's going to want to see numbers on front page. So I think there is that tired narrative as well, which if we could do away with that, then perhaps then perhaps it could encourage more writers.
Correct. And I definitely see that's changing with some of the best editors, but I think probably more needs to happen. And I think the ethos, pathos, logos trio, I think still is very much alive and kicking, is what we're saying. One more very interesting question has come from avid reader. So he's saying, how can anyone as an individual become data literate, and how do you seek out reliable sources for data? Could be either of you.
Should I go first? Yeah,
Go ahead,
I'm
Rukmini.
sure Govind will have thoughts too. But yeah, so I think there's been a real explosion of people working with data and working to make data open, widely accessible, and sort of transparent. So IndiaSpend is a notable example of working with data as well as ground reporting. There are also organizations like Factly that are very much focused on data literacy, on making people familiar with what data exists out there. There are several volunteer driven efforts like an organization called Data Meet that has now grown significantly over the last 10 years, which is also dedicated to sort of open sharing of data. So these are all great resources for someone looking to make themselves more data literate. And I see this movement growing. This sort of Indian public spirited open data movement is certainly growing. Additionally, I would say that there is some responsibility on the side of journalists and others who work with data to build greater credibility. And one of the ways to do that is to make the data that goes behind the reporting freely available. We have to let people look at the numbers themselves to be able to make up their minds, in addition to the reporting we do. Now that we have tools like GitHub and other places where we should all be putting our data out in public or redirecting to the sources, I think that's on us. That way of building credibility to convince people that we're not producing a cherry picked version of the numbers, that's on us.
Right. And I think very important point, Rukmini, from what you mentioned is just because we are analyzing data, we may not have all the answers, but we can initiate a discussion. Sometimes it's about scenarios and giving people a space to actually discuss and come back, rather than giving a unilateral answer. See, this is data and this is the answer. That's also probably a hard journey that we need to take, as people who are dealing with data. Anything to add to that, Govindraj? I'm sure you would have your view on that. And a lot of what you do is actually shaping better data literacy.
Yeah, I mean, a slightly larger point. When we started, our larger sort of mission was to improve the quality of public discourse, and that's how we came to data. So I think we, as a society, I mean, it sounds very broad and boiling the ocean, but as children in schools or in colleges, I think we have to develop or focus on critical thinking. If you develop critical thinking, my sense is, or if you focus on it, you'll automatically come to data as a tool to understanding issues better and to, as I said, improving the quality of public discourse. How else do you argue a point convincingly? By using data. So I think that is the larger thing that we should focus on as educators, as a literature festival. We do something called India Fact Quiz, and you can go online and join it. It's called indiafactquiz.com. It's under IndiaSpend. Where we hold quizzes every week, and typically we take the questions are derived from IndiaSpend stories mostly, and they also test biases. And we usually sometimes we go college to college. We have anywhere between 100 to 500 people joining in. So and this tells us that people are interested, but the challenge and the opportunity in a way is to make it interesting, and is to, like I said, is to focus on the larger challenge. Or the larger maybe conundrum is that how do you make people and or all of us, how do we become more critically oriented in our thinking, in our approach to issues, in our approach to discussions, and that way hopefully we go to the next level, at least instead of saying, oh, I thought so and I think so and maybe so. And
Correct. No, thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of our time. This has been fascinating discussion, Rukmini and Govindraj. And I think it was Edward Deming who was supposed to have said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." But I think, as we know now, with listening, after listening to you, that we must not just bring data, we must weave narratives, we must tell compelling stories, and we must be open to listening to biases and even working with biases. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ganesh.
thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rukmini, Govind, and Debleena for a fascinating session, for a fascinating chat into the backstory of data and some of the troublesome and some of the hidden nuances that people wouldn't have known of otherwise. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you at the fest.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I think it's more or less a wrap for the day, but don't go just yet. I have a couple of important things to talk to you about. One is that I'd love to introduce our. So we come to the end of today's sessions. Yeah, that's the first part. But there's a lot in store tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. So just hang on, and I'm going to give you a glimpse of tomorrow's program. But before that, something else that's very, very important. I mentioned early on when I opened this, earlier in the evening, that we've built an ecosystem, and it is this ecosystem that has nurtured this festival year after year. And if we are where we are today, it's because of 3 or 4 key kinds of people. One is obviously you, the audience, but for you, we wouldn't be here, the reader, right? And then there are the speakers, people who come on stage and enrich us with their thoughts, with their work, with their questions, their answers. And then there are behind the scenes partners and sponsors. And I want to spend a minute in introducing them to you now. So Kirti, can I have that slide on screen, please? Yes. So a huge round of thanks to our title sponsor, ICFI Business School. They've been with us for the last few years, and they've seen us grow year after year. And much of that credit has to go to them for their backing. The award for the best business book, which we pick out every year in the name of CK Prahalad, as Raghu said earlier today, is sponsored by TVS Capital, and thanks to them. Yes, next. And then we have a small family, a small community of partners. They've also stayed with us year after year, and I want to take this time out to thank them for being with us and for enriching the world of BBLF with their presence. Indian Institute of Management Bangalore is our knowledge partner. Your Story has been our media partner for a long time, and they year after year they diligently bring out stories on the fest as a precursor in the run up to the fest and afterwards. Thank you so much for that. Thanks, Your Story. Tamala and Arani are our lovely boutique gifting partners. So if you haven't heard of them, you should go check them out. You should go visit their websites. They have some wonderful work. Our library partners are Just Books and KLib. Blossoms, who doesn't know, at least who's lived or spent some time in Bangalore, doesn't know of Blossoms. Blossoms on Church Street are our bookstore partners. And if you've registered for the 17th, that is Saturday, the Startup Literature Day, and if you land up at Bangalore International Center, you can get to see a wonderful display of books brought to us by Blossom. So please do come, and please, this is a reminder for you to register for that day separately. And finally, the Journalism School, NJIM. Thank you to the Journalism School partner. Also, thanks a lot for them. And all of these people together have created, like I said, nurtured this ecosystem. So thanks a lot to our partners and sponsors. Yes, Kirti, we can move ahead. Can I have tomorrow's program sheet, please? Hello, Kirti, can I have tomorrow's program sheet? Can we just see at a glimpse what is on store tomorrow for us? Just a sec, guys, just a sec. Yes, there you go. So we start at 5 p.m. tomorrow with the Shark Tank Tales. Namita Thapar, an investor who appeared in the Shark Tank, is going to be with us, and she'll be in conversation with Rupangi Sharma. Namita's book has just released. She's the author of the book, The Dolphin and the Shark, Lessons in Entrepreneurship. So that conversation will take on from there and from Namita's own experience as an entrepreneur. Then we move into the next session at 5:30, How to Build a Prosperous India, where we have veteran journalist R.N. Bhaskar talking about his book and his theories and hypotheses and what he's understood about Game India, about how India can build itself or continue to build itself as an economic superpower based on 7 specific strategic advantages. And then we have a very interesting session at 6 p.m. where we will look at Indian corporate frauds right? So Harshad Mehta, your non-banking asset scams, and generally a lot of scams have rocked the Indian corporate world in the last couple of decades. So this session with Marks Smarak Swain and Shubha Chandrasekharan, we'll take a look at that. And that will be based on Smarak's book, The Great Indian Fraud, Serious Frauds Which Shook the Economy. And we end the day on a dramatic note, yet another dramatic session. So we ended on a dramatic note. This is titled From High Flyers to Fallen Angels, Stories of Cafe Coffee Day, Reliance, the Anil Ambani Group, Jet Airways, and Kingfisher Airlines. So this session is going to take a look at some of the marquee companies, marquee brands that were feted in Indian industry by the Indian media and by the public, and but they nosedived. Yeah, so there was a drastic fall, and what led to that? The backstories, the nuances, the realities that led to their failure and fall. This is what we're going to look at in tomorrow's last session. And this will hold a lot of lessons, invaluable lessons to entrepreneurs, to people who want to run sustainable businesses, long-standing businesses. So that's the lineup we have for tomorrow. So please come back at 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, IST. So for now, that's it. It's a wrap from day one at BBLF 2022. Thanks a lot for being here. So we hope to see you tomorrow. I'm signing off. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.